After playing Space Marine 2, I can say that it's not what I expected. And honestly, I think that's fine. Space Marine 2 was marketed as the next big co-op experience, and everyone across the co-op Horde community was excited for a next-gen co-op game. Some even went as far to call it the Helldivers Killer and the Darktide Killer, and I can pretty confidently say that Space Marine 2 isn't either of those things. I, and I'm certain many others, thought Space Marines was going to have a similar gameplay loop to that of Helldivers and Darktide, containing build diversity, talents, skills, and procedurally generated missions that can provide virtually infinite gameplay. And while the game does contain a specific mode that does all of this, it's not really the main focus of the game. The game is pretty evenly split between three main modes. Operations, which is the highly customizable, skill tree-focused experience, Eternal War, which is the PvP-focused mode, and the main story campaign that really has no in-depth customization. You are able to choose a loadout via what weapons you want to bring into a mission, but these weapons are locked to a specific group depending on the missions you play, and distinctly lacks the weapon mastery and skill system that Operations has. The game pretty heavily pushes the campaign as the main experience of the game. Starting a new game has you choose a difficulty specifically for the campaign, and you must go through a portion of the campaign before you unlock Operations and Eternal War, which the game does explicitly say will spoil the story of the campaign if you play the Operations game mode before completing the main campaign. That doesn't make complete sense to me, since the game outright locks most operation missions until you complete the campaign anyway, but that's besides the point. This in turn creates a game not like the Tide games or Helldivers, but closer to something like Gears of War, that had a main campaign as the focus of the game, but had PvP and PvE modes on the side to keep players engaged past the main campaign. This causes Space Marine 2 to feel less like an infinitely replayable game and more like a game that will inherently have a shorter shelf life. Unless you get really invested in the PvP side of things, I'd wager most people will enjoy the game up until a certain point where they run out of things to do, which will cause them to shelve the game and move on to something else. The main campaign wasn't built with replayability in mind, considering there are no rewards, achievements, or cosmetics for beating the main campaign on the hardest difficulty, and the grind for Operations mode has no prestige options, meaning that unless you are a completionist and want to max out every single class and unlock every single cosmetic, you'll pretty much be done with the game once you level one class to max and beat all of the operations on the hardest difficulty. Because of this, I don't really think it's fair or even really possible to compare Space Marine to Helldivers or Darktide. Space Marine 2 is more akin to one of those streamlined campaign shooters that saturated the market in the early 2000s on the Xbox 360, but with more modernized gameplay and gameplay systems to appeal to the average gamer in 2024. Those kinds of games are not intended to be infinitely replayable, and while there are certainly modes that aim to help extend the replayability, just like some of those early 2000s games had, it's not designed to keep your attention for longer than a few months at most. I really feel like this kind of game is looked down upon in the sphere of gaming, but I don't really see an issue with it. The gaming community in general puts strong emphasis on the replayability of games, which I personally think is partially because inflation has skyrocketed the price of other forms of entertainment. Gaming hasn't really been affected by inflation though, and is comparatively one of the cheapest forms of entertainment on the market if you're one of those players who can dump hundreds upon thousands of hours into a game. This has caused people to want games to be highly replayable so that they can feel like they got their money's worth, and that push for replayability has caused a lot of games to feel bloated and to really overstay their welcome. Between the copy-paste fetch quests and time wasters that Ubisoft is known for, obtuse systems that aim to waste your time through RNG like Darktide's crafting system, to the gacha, gambling-esque games that try to trap their players in to bleed their wallets dry like Genshin Impact. I think we as gamers have been almost conditioned to want these kind of games, partially because of inflation, but also because we've forgotten what it's like to have a game release as a complete package. A game doesn't have to be infinitely replayable to be good, nor does it have to have an endless drip feed of content to be worth the price. all good things must come to an end, and a game that has a limited amount of good, engaging content is still a good game, and I think Space Marine 2 falls under this category. The campaign was fun and did a great service to the fans of 40k, boasting some of the most visually impressive cutscenes and gameplay moments I've seen in a long time that made the experience worthwhile, and we still get 2 entirely separate modes to have fun with after that do offer replayability. This isn't to mention the roadmap that they released that shows what they're adding over the next year, including new missions, difficulties, weapons, a horde mode, prestige ranks, and more, all entirely for free. They've said that only cosmetics will be locked behind a paywall, and if we take Saber at face value when they say that they will never lock actual gameplay content behind a paywall, Space Marine 2 won't be a game that is endlessly replayable, but will be a game that we can come back to time and time and time again after we've burned ourselves out on Darktide, Helldivers, or whatever the main game is we play. I will be the first to admit, though, that I regret paying for the gold edition of this game. $100 for early access and some access to extra cosmetics was not worth it, but I do think the base asking price of $60 is very reasonable if Saber keeps their word that they're not going to be locking content behind paywalls. I'd also say that it's fair to choose to wait a bit as well. They're most likely going to put the game on sale whenever it gets new content, so waiting for one of those moments would allow you to get a more overall robust experience while keeping some more money in your wallet. What do you think, though? If you've played Space Marine 2, what do you think about the game? And if you haven't, are you considering buying this game or not? Let me know down in the comments below.